If you were to ask any American to discuss the topic of prohibition, they would more than likely describe well-dressed Al Capone-esque gangsters firing Tommy guns while escaping the police. You may even hear a reference or two to Kevin Costner and his portrayal as Elliot Ness in the movie The Untouchables. You may even hear about Kentucky moonshiners using corn mash to distill a very powerful concoction called White Lightning, rumored to be called so because of its ability to blind you. No matter your stance of prohibition, the effects of banning the sale, production, importation, and transportation of alcoholic beverages had a profound effect on the American populace. I am not a history major. Outside of personal use, I am no expert on alcohol. I am, however, a huge fan of this country, and I find the 18th Amendment fascinating. Today I will cover how Prohibition started and the effects Prohibition had on America, to include the increase of organized crime, amount of alcohol consumed by the average American, and other effects of Prohibition. In the early 1800s, a wave of religious revivalism swept through the United States, leading for an increased calls for temperance movements, such as the abolition of slavery. By the turn of the century, temperance movements quickly gained momentum. On December 18, 1917, the U.S. Senate proposed the 18th Amendment. Upon approval on January 16, 1919, the amendment was ratified, and the country went dry 1 year later, on January 17, 1920. This act was known as the Volstead Act. 3 federal agencies were assigned to the task of enforcing the Volstead Act: the IRS, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Department of Justice. The most extreme effects of Prohibition were the boost of organized crime. Organized groups received a major boost. Mafia groups limited their activities before Prohibition to prostitution, gambling, and theft up until 1920, when organized bootlegging emerged in response to Prohibition. According to Charles Hanson Tao, from a study of 30 U.S. major cities during the Prohibition years, the number of crimes increased 24%. Theft and burglaries increased by 9%. Homicides, 12.7%. Assault and battery rose 13%. Drug addiction rose by a staggering 44%. And police departments' costs rose by 11.4%. This was largely a result due to the black market violence and the diversion of law enforcement resources elsewhere. Despite the Dry Movement's hope that outlawing alcohol would reduce crime, the reality was that the Volstead Act led to higher crime rates than experienced prior to Prohibition. This sudden, often violent acts committed by organized crime shocked America. An actual Constitution amendment banning the sale, production, importation, and transportation of alcoholic beverages, not to mention sharp increases in crimes, Prohibition did its job in reducing the amount of alcohol drank by Americans. As you can imagine, illegal sales were not officially reported or measured, but these were the indirect estimates using alcohol-related deaths, a decrease linked specifically to ongoing alcohol consumption. Scholars estimate that consumption dropped to a low of 60% of pre-Prohibition levels around 1925, rising to almost 80% before the law was officially repealed. Organized crime ran rampant. The amount of drinking Americans did decrease, but there were other effects to take account of. Even today, we still feel the effects. The 18th Amendment left a strong impression. According to Jack S. Blocker, before Prohibition, you would barely see women drinking in public, especially in the saloons, until the point where people were forced to drink in semi-public areas called speakeasies. Alcohol marketeers had to actually cater to their new clientele, and they had to expand their reach, which included women. All NASCAR fans can thank the 18th Amendment. In the rural areas of southern United States, bootleggers modified their cars and trucks by enhancing engines and suspensions in order to make their vehicles run faster, in the hope of outrunning the Beirut Prohibition. This activity was a spawning point for car racing and eventually NASCAR. Today we learn some of the effects of Prohibition, how it started, but all things must come to an end, even sometimes constitutional amendments. On March 22, 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt signed an amendment to the Volstead Act, known as the Cullen-Harrison Act, which allowed the manufacture and sale of beers, and light wines. Upon signing the Cole and Harrison Act, Roosevelt made his famous remark, "I think this would be a good time for a beer." Today, America is at a crossroads with its decision on how to handle mind-altering substances. I propose we learn from the lessons of the past, focusing on the 18th Amendment and its effects.